Isis Unveiled, the blockbuster book that ignited a movement. Isis Unveiled, published in 1877, was Helena Petrovna Blavatsky's first salvo in the battle against the dogmatic religion and materialistic science of her day. It was an immediate success that prompted sharp reactions as well as accolades from critics, and proved to be very popular, soon requiring numerous reprints. The importance of this work can hardly be overstated. Without it, the Theosophical Society would have been stillborn. The Theosophical movement intended by Blavatsky and her teachers left without direction, spiritual impulse, principles, or a common language. With it, scholars, scientists, religionists, free thinkers, and even spiritualists had a basis for inquiry, a fresh look at a wider world of thought than their own cramped disciplines had previously allowed. Isis Unveiled challenged all the closely held orthodoxies of the day. It laid the groundwork for further clarification and expansion of theosophical ideas in Blavatsky's later writings and those of her colleagues and co-workers, notably A.P. Sinnett and William Q. Judge. It was a necessary prelude to her later major work, The Secret Doctrine, which filled a larger purpose by focusing attention on the more esoteric and metaphysical aspects of what she called in Isis the arcane knowledge. Despite its many critics and obvious shortcomings, Isis forever altered the intellectual landscape of the 19th century. It gave the world a first look at the evidence of that ancient wisdom and introduced radical concepts, such as the inherent spiritual nature and perfectibility of man, the unity of man and nature, and a new perspective on the mysteries of the hidden psychic world. Our work, then, is a plea for the recognition of the Hermetic philosophy, the anciently universal wisdom religion, as the only possible key to the absolute in science and theology. H.P. Blavatsky. Today, I would like to cover three aspects of Isis Unveiled. First, some background about the times in which it was written, the mindset of the age, if you will, and the conditions which the writer, H.P. Blavatsky, or HPB to her friends and students and her teachers faced in representing the ancient wisdom to the world. Second, I will say a bit about the writing of the book, the many practical barriers that had to be overcome, and the help, often unexpected and mysterious, that she received. Finally, I will discuss some of the major themes of Isis Unveiled itself, their value to us and to the world. It is important to note that Isis Unveiled is part and parcel of a larger purpose and intent, an even larger philosophy, religion, and science, known as Theosophia, the ancient wisdom religion. It is fully consistent with all her later works, from The Secret Doctrine and other books to the many hundreds of articles and letters she wrote during her lifetime. Given the limitations of her audience and the prejudices of the times, she could only divulge so much. The mental soil, so to speak, had first to be prepared, so that fuller explanations could be given later. It was an outline with copious supporting facts and information, but with many of the details left to be filled in. Yet, Isis Unveiled was intentional, a purposeful blockbuster, meant to challenge as well as to enlighten. And as the noted Platonist, Dr. Alexander Wilder, said when he first saw the manuscript, it was a book with a revolution in it. Theology has disfigured ancient theosophy, and science ancient philosophy. H.P. Blavatsky. The world into which this incredible book was introduced was at a crossroads. The relative newcomer, materialistic science, vied against religion and its established centuries-old orthodoxies. Fresh with its newfound powers over nature, science was fast denying a reality to anything other than brute matter and the blind forces that drove it. Religion, dogmatically relying on revelation and outside authority, gave lip service to doing good, but left little room for a rational basis for ethics, and attributed all unexplained phenomena to the work of the devil and his legions. True philosophy and divine truth are convertible terms. A religion which dreads the light cannot be a religion based on either truth or philosophy. Hence, it must be false. H.P. Blavatsky. The real challenge that Isis Unveiled made to the religious world was to show the spiritual nature of man, exemplified by its greatest examples, the great teachers, who are not limited to the one personage, Jesus of Nazareth. Denying that there is such a thing as miracles, and placing natural but currently unknown law as the centerpiece, she agrees with Shakespeare that there are more things in heaven and earth than are dreamt of in the current philosophies of the West. Faith is to be supplanted by knowledge, which is possible for all human beings. And as it has been acquired in the past, so will it be available in the future. The universe is the combination of 1,000 elements, and yet the expression of a single spirit, a chaos to the sense, a cosmos to the reason. H.P. Blavatsky. Isis opposed the entrenched materialism of the day and challenged scientists to explore the unexplained phenomena then occurring daily in the seance rooms of Europe and America. It questioned the very assumptions of materialism and gave profuse examples of powers and phenomena from many past civilizations. While acknowledging the value of honest science, she also demonstrated, using their very logic and facts, their inconsistencies and limitations, leaving room for and inviting further investigation. But except for a few notable exceptions, the vast store of history, the observations, records, and knowledge of the past presented in Isis were ignored. Between these two titans, science and religion, the recent advent of miscalled spiritualism suggested new, invisible realms of exploration, but gave only one possible explanation: the spirits of the dead. But what we could call the existential pains of life were palpable to an increasing number of people, with questions such as, what happens after death? Where have my dead loved ones gone? Is there a way to contact them, even just one last time to offer a goodbye, or to say, I love you, and to make sure that they're all right? As HPB asks in the preface to Isis, who, where, what is God? Whoever saw the immortal spirit of man so as to be able to assure himself of man's immortality? Blavatsky's answer right at the outset of Isis, is instructive and illuminates the path she will take in the entire book. In fact, in Theosophy itself. Man's spirit proves God's spirit, as the one drop of water proves the source from which it must have come. Tell one who had never seen water that there is an ocean of water, and he must accept it on faith or reject it altogether. But let one drop fall upon his hand, and he then has the fact from which all the rest may be inferred. H.P. Blavatsky. As simple as this may sound, neither science nor religion could offer satisfactory answers to these important questions, and spiritualism's answers were equally inconclusive. Despite its shortcomings and frequently fraudulent proponents, spiritualism was the only available soil into which to plant the seeds of a philosophy that encompassed all of nature and of human beings. Yet, most spiritualists were too fascinated by the phenomena they were experiencing, phenomena which required no ethical standards, no philosophy, and little methodical scientific investigation. This conflict among three opposing and unreconciled fields of thought was largely confined to the Western world, which was also actively striving to profit from the exploitation of the abundant wealth and resources of what was then simply called the East. The continuing barrage of centuries of colonial exploitation by the West left the few native Eastern scholars, such as the Indian Brahmins, understandably wary of Western motives. As a result, those scholars often obscured rather than assisted outside efforts to interpret their knowledge. The vast intellectual, philosophical, religious, and cultural treasures of half of the world were just beginning to be appreciated by Western minds. But the depth of that ancient wisdom was barely suspected. The very idea of perfected human beings and their wisdom and knowledge, while completely lost in the West, was relegated to a belief in the East that the rishis, or sages of old, had long since departed and would not return for many ages. I am here in this country, sent by my lodge, on behalf of truth in modern spiritualism, and it is my most sacred duty to unveil what is and expose what is not. H.P. Blavatsky, Letter to Professor Hiram Corson, February 1875. This was the task set before H.P. Blavatsky, a purpose hardly known to her before her arrival in America in 1873. Today, we know Isis Unveiled is a finished work, but its completion was far from certain, its success in no way guaranteed. It went from a seed idea in the summer of 1875, when she wrote the first few pages, to a published work in the fall of 1877. It is important to note just how amazing a production it was to complete in a little over 2 years, the difficulties encountered by the writer, and the help she got in researching and writing its nearly 1,300 pages. When Blavatsky first arrived in New York, she had no means of financial support, a conversational grasp of English, a language in which she had never written, no knowledge of proper literary standards or procedures, and knew absolutely no one. By the next year, she had made the acquaintance of several individuals who would prove helpful and valuable in the work she was destined to fulfill. Colonel Henry Steele Olcott was a distinguished attorney, journalist, and spiritualist, whom Blavatsky first met at a famous series of seances at the Eddy farmhouse in Vermont in 1874. Her teachers had, in fact, specifically asked her to meet and engage Alcott in the work she was going to undertake. Impressed with Blavatsky, he greatly helped with the language and organizing of Isis and remained a staunch friend and ally throughout her life. As president of the Theosophical Society, which he co-founded with Blavatsky in 1875, he was instrumental in promoting the work of that society worldwide. Of Blavatsky's focus and determination during the writing of Isis Unveiled, he wrote, "Her work went on without break or interruption until its completion in the year 1877. In her whole life, she had not done a tithe of such literary labor, yet I never knew even a managing daily journalist who could be compared with her for dogged endurance or tireless working capacity." Henry Steele Olcott, Old Diary Leaves. Professor Hiram Corson was an eminent scholar and lecturer on English literature at Cornell University, at whose home in Ithaca, New York, Blavatsky stayed and worked when she began writing Isis. He had originally contacted her because of the death of his 16-year-old daughter, whom he had hoped Blavatsky could help him contact. And while she steadfastly refused to hold a seance as he requested, Corson and his wife still welcomed her into their home where she could begin her work. Dr. Alexander Wilder, a noted Platonic scholar, archaeologist, author, educator, and practicing physician, who among all HPB's new friends and acquaintances was the one person able to help extensively with proofing and editing Isis. He was referred to Colonel Olcott by J.W. Boughton, the publisher of Isis, who asked him to examine the first draft. Wilder called the manuscript truly a ponderous document, but agreed to review it upon seeing its extensive research, obvious erudition, and vast range of topics. We have Dr. Wilder to thank for much of the wonderful introduction at the beginning of the first volume, called Before the Veil, as well as the 50-page index, to both of which HPB later said he contributed greatly without wanting any attribution or credit. And last but certainly not least, a young New York attorney in his early 20s named William Q. Judge, who would become her staunch colleague, co-worker, and advocate of theosophy in America for the next 2 decades. Their first meeting in 1874 altered Judge for life and profoundly affected the theosophical movement. Having seen what he called the lion's glance, the diamond heart of HPB, Judge spent many evenings learning from her at her residence in New York City, dubbed the Lamasery. The writing of Isis Unveiled was a time of learning for Alcott as well as Judge, who said that after long days of work, their nights were taken up with glorious 6 hours spent in listening to the words of those illuminated ones who came when all was still and talked by the hour, watching or instructing us. They met here at HPB's apartment in New York City, dubbed the Lamasery, where she welcomed guests of all sorts, every one of whom she treated with universal respect. The helpers and friends noted above, as well as others later, reported that HPB wrote both Isis Unveiled and The Secret Doctrine without having access to most of the books and other works from which she quoted extensively. For example, we have this from Dr. Corson's son, Dr. Eugene Corson, who later wrote regarding Isis. HPB did not simply copy out of books what she wanted to write about, as we ordinary mortals would do, but that she got her copy automatically or clairvoyantly, or saw it in the astral, which is as good as any way to describe it. It was the easiest and most obvious way to understand how she wrote in Ithaca the beginning of Isis Unveiled. She had no books to consult in my father's library, and certainly he could not help her at the task. Some unpublished letters of H. P. Blavatsky, Chapter 2, compiler E.R. Corson. Isis Unveiled, a master key to the mysteries of ancient and modern science and theology. Well, while not outright wrong, this title is a bit misleading. It was suggested by the publisher, J.W. Boughton, over HPB's preferred title, The Veil of Isis, after it was found that there was already a similarly titled book in print, The Veil of Isis, or Mysteries of the Druids, by W. W. Reed, published in 1861. HPB made it clear that the intent of her book, Isis Unveiled, was to show that Isis, the symbolic goddess of great nature, the basis of all life, is but a veil for the spiritual, psychic, and other hidden aspects of our essential nature. The subtitle, likewise, was probably added by the publisher and was not meant to be an entire key to the mysteries. As one of her teachers wrote 4 years later, Isis was not unveiled, but rents sufficiently large were made to afford fitting glances to be completed by the student's own intuition. In this curry of quotations from various philosophic and esoteric truths, purposefully veiled, behold our doctrine, which is now being partially taught to Europeans for the first time, the Mahatma Letters. We are given glimpses of the outer veil of Isis, the hidden goddess of nature, the garment only of vast fields of knowledge that can only be reached by rising to the level of our own true inner self. As noted earlier, Isis Unveiled sold out almost immediately upon publication, going through several printings, and it remains available today through several theosophical publishers. The original rights to the book during HPB's lifetime were retained by the publisher, J.W. Boughton of New York, and it sold so well that HPB was not allowed to make any changes or even to correct typographical errors. The Secret Doctrine, published 11 years later, was originally conceived as an updated revision of Isis. And as one of her teachers commented, perhaps in jest, Isis should be rewritten for the sake of the family honor. HPB herself later acknowledged the jumbled mixture and digressions, but then added, but in spite of these two great admissions, I maintain that Isis Unveiled contains a mass of original and hitherto never divulged information on occult subjects. That this is so is proved by the fact that the work has been fully appreciated by all those who have been intelligent enough to discern the kernel and pay little attention to the shell, to give the preference to the idea and not to the form, regardless of its minor shortcomings. H. P. Blavatsky, My Books, Lucifer, May 1891. Isis Unveiled was both a uniting and a dividing book, as it demanded that readers look at the evidence she presented and do their own thinking. For over 2 years, from its publication in 1877 until HPB went to India and began writing and editing her new magazine, The Theosophist, in October 1879, Isis Unveiled was the text for Theosophists and the Theosophical Society. Even later, with the publication of works by A.P. Sinnett, such as Esoteric Buddhism in the early 1880s, it remained the essential theosophical work. Isis gave theosophy some scope historical roots, working principles, and definitions, but it also alienated the majority of the initial members of the Theosophical Society, who were spiritualists. They stopped attending the society meetings in New York when HPB refused to perform phenomena for their benefit. The spiritualists were interested in demonstrations of psychic ability, but not in philosophy or any alternative explanations except the contact with the dear departed. They were already upset with HPB's letters and articles published in the spiritualist journals, and Isis Unveiled only solidified their opposition, even though she defended their phenomena as real and deserving of careful investigation. That defense, however, did not include ignoring the very real dangers inherent in their so-called spiritualist practices. Having opposed modern materialistic science, entrenched dogmatic religions, and the explanations of their puny stepchild, spiritualism, we can begin to see why Isis Unveiled was a blockbuster work, and why it was indeed a book with a revolution in it. Let's look briefly at its structure before we highlight a few of its themes. Although it largely could be said to be a scientific examination of its subjects, and only reaches some conclusions at the end, it both starts and ends with first principles. In between, HPB gathers a wide array of information and specific examples to prove her points and support those larger ideals. Two sections, the opening preface along with the Before the Veil introduction, and the concluding chapter at the end of the book, mark off the broad principles of Isis Unveiled and act as a pair of literary bookends. The beginning and the end of the book are therefore keys to our understanding it, so that we may at least get a glimpse of the veil of Isis. The preface begins by mentioning Eastern adepts and their science as the source of her knowledge and inspiration. And Before the Veil introduces the philosophy of Plato as a middle ground between science, theology, and spiritualism. As the world's interpreter, in Emerson's phrase, Plato is the link between the ancient wisdom of both East and West and our modern concepts. Before the Veil contains definitions of many of the terms that appear later in the book and gives the reader a hint of what is to come. From astral light to akasha, elemental spirits to elementary spirits, Kabbalists to metempsychosis, hierophants to magicians, the mysteries to theurgists, and much more. Then in the second volume, the last chapter lists 10 fundamental propositions of the Oriental philosophy, which we will briefly touch upon in a moment. In between, Isis covers a vast field of subjects, barely outlined in the opening introductions and the final and the closing chapter. The first volume, Science, subtitled The Infallibility of Modern Science, with each page heading The Veil of Isis, keeping the intended title of the entire work, compares the materialism and limitations of contemporary science with the vast achievements of the ancients. It introduces the Hindu cyclical chronology and doctrine of the yugas as equally vast as the current geological periods, contrasts the ancient knowledge of magnetism and vital force with contemporary mesmerism and psychism, compares the Oriental Kabbalah with the Vedas, and complements Darwinism and natural selection with Eastern ideas on spiritual evolution and emanation. HPB wants to restore the honor of the ancients and show that past civilizations had risen to heights unguessed by her contemporaries. In the second volume, Theology, subtitled The Infallibility of Religion, examines in depth the religious traditions of the ancient world. HPB compares the outer forms as well as the inner meanings of symbols, ceremonies, legends, and myths of so-called pagan religions, and shows these as the root of their modern, corrupted reflections. She delves into the histories of early Christianity, compares Jesus with the Buddha, Krishna and Apollonius of Tyana, and shows how Pythagoras, Plato, and Paracelsus are linked to Egypt, Chaldea, and India. Christians and Christians, Nazars and Nazarenes, mediums and adepts, Christos and Ensof, Sephiroth and Kabbalah are all given her attention and critical examination in light of their principles as well as their practical, ethical, and moral results in the world. All of this is truly the outer veil of Isis, the hidden goddess of nature, the garment only of vast fields of knowledge. But by understanding the outer forms, the inner realities can begin to be approached and eventually reached by rising to the level of our own true inner self. To summarize both volumes would be an impossible task in a short presentation, but perhaps the following highlights, adapted from her 10 propositions of the Oriental philosophy, convey something of her intent and purpose. 1. There is an ancient hidden wisdom, a still traceable universal system of religious, scientific, and philosophical knowledge, which beneficently used was known as magic, misapplied was called sorcery. 2. There have always been knowers of that wisdom, exemplified in the great founders of all the world's religions. In Isis Unveiled, HPB called them the Eastern Adepts and Sages of the Orient. In The Secret Doctrine and elsewhere, Masters and Mahatmas. All are terms indicating that they are the elder brothers of humanity. But these are not just shamans and sorcerers, but real men and women who have perfected their inner psychic and spiritual faculties. As these can act with full knowledge, they are the opposite of mediums, who are essentially passive. 3. Man and nature are both threefold, popularly described as spirit, soul, and body. In between the spiritual or godlike and the obvious physical is the invisible, astral realm, often mistaken for the spiritual. The permanent records of that realm, or astral light, can be known by the adept through knowledge of the inner sciences that include magnetism and electricity. 4. All of nature is cyclical, which evolves and unfolds from within via a process of emanation. This includes civilizations whose vast history is known to the Eastern Adepts. 5. Self-reliance, individual conscience, and spiritual freedom are necessary prerequisites to real knowledge, and therefore humans need no outside authority, no church, no dogma. 6. Truth, unity, and ethics. Underlying everything Blavatsky wrote is a moral imperative. The great ones serve humanity with their powers and knowledge. These are truly revolutionary ideas, if their intent and practical use are understood. Science, religion, and all aspects of our society have been influenced by them since the publication of Isis Unveiled. If any book could ever have been said to make an epoch, this one could. Its effects have been as important in one way as those of Darwin's first great work have been in another. Both were tidal waves in modern thought, and each tended to sweep away theological crudities and replace the belief in miracle with the belief in natural law. Henry Steele Olcott, Old Diary Leaves. In this presentation, I have attempted to outline some of the background, the writing, and the basic concepts and purpose of H.P. Blavatsky's first seminal work, Ísis Unveiled. While incomplete, I hope that this brief introduction will inspire students and inquirers of all levels of experience with theosophical ideas and writings to read the book. Filled with wonderful stories, fascinating examples, and sharp critical thinking on an amazing variety of topics. Ísis Unveiled is a deep reservoir of information and analysis. HPB is arguing for knowledge, and more specifically, self-knowledge, which ultimately must be transformed into knowledge of the universal self. This can only be done without the limitations of blind belief or soul-denying materialism, but requires the effort to seek the truth for oneself, wherever that path may lead. HPB set an example for us. It is for us to follow her lead, not blindly, but with open eyes and appreciation for all those who, like her, have trod the path and shed light on our journey. Thank you.
Porque na vida a gente quer se conhecer, pra entre